Horror video games have truly stood the test of time, from the first horror game ever, 3D Monster Rays, in 1981, which featured a first-person perspective where players navigated a maze while being hunted by a Tyrannosaurus Rex, all the way to Alone in the Dark in 1992, which generally considered the first true 3D survival horror game, setting the standard for the genre's fixed camera angles and puzzle solving. The genre wasn't truly popularized until the release of Resident Evil in 1996, establishing the survival horror genre, prioritizing a slow burn, limited resources, and atmospheric dread over action. Nowadays, horror video games are absolutely everywhere, with about 1,000 releasing on Steam every year, with notable games taking over the gaming community every single year, with recent popular games like Silent Hill F and No I'm Not a Human that was just released last year. I love video games, which is a statement I think a lot of people can agree with. I mean, who in the world has gone their whole life without playing at least one? But for years, I've avoided horror video games like the plague. I loved horror movies, but the thought of being in control terrified me. My own cousin had nightmares for a month just from playing Outlast. So, I stuck to various story games like Assassin's Creed or Red Dead Redemption. It wasn't until over a year ago I played my first real horror game. The game was Resident Evil 2, the remake. I tried playing the game 6 months prior, but it felt like my body simply rejected a task like walking down the empty hallway. I felt like every turn would lead into a jump scare, but this time I was determined not to quit. I made sure to play the game at 2 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon, making sure all the lights were on and the sun was shining brightly. I wrapped myself in a soft blanket in order to shield me from the evil forces radiating from the game. Then, I just pressed start. I kept moving my joystick and aiming at the zombies. Then, I got to the part where I quit the first time. I ignored the darkness and the creepy noises, and I kept moving forward. Before I knew it, I finished the game. And that's what this video is all about, how horror video games are so effective at making you scared as well as entertained. There are so many horror games, and with that means many different genres. You have survival horror, which is one of the most well-defined and popular subgenres, emphasizing resource scarcity, puzzle solving, and invasion over combat. And then you have games like Resident Evil, Silent Hill, and Amnesia that exemplify this, focusing on survival through limited supplies and exploration. Then you have action horror, which blends fast-paced combat with horror themes, offering more offensive capabilities. Titles such as Resident Evil 4, Dead Space, and Left 4 Dead feature intense action sequences, often in third-person perspectives, balancing survival elements with aggressive gameplay. Now, there's psychological horror, which prioritizes mental and emotional unease over jump scares or physical threats. These games manipulate perception, identity, and sanity, using atmosphere and narrative to unsettle players. Notable examples include Silent Hill 2, Soma, Doki Doki Literature Club, and Spec Ops: The Line. Another popular subgenre is jump scare horror, which centers on sudden, startling moments designed to shock players. The Five Nights at Freddy's series is the most iconic example, where tension builds through anticipation of a surprise attack, often in repetitive, task-based gameplay. You also have stealth horror, which combines suspense with hiding mechanics, forcing players to avoid detection. Games like Alien Isolation, Outlast, and Visage emphasize silence, stealth, and constant threat awareness, often featuring relentless pursuers. Then you have indie horror, which refers to games developed by small studios or individuals, often featuring unique creative scares despite limited budgets. Titles like Hello Neighbor, The Forest, and Detention showcase the subgenre's innovation and replayability. A genre that has become more popular as of late is online horror, which involves multiplayer experiences, often with asymmetrical gameplay where one player controls a killer and others try to survive. Dead by Daylight and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre are leading examples, emphasizing teamwork, strategy, and social tension. In horror media, there's a long thought process in order to make a game actually scary. Every horror game uses a variety of techniques. One of the most infamous ways to scare someone is the good old jump scare. If you want a good jump scare, you need to build up that at first, invokes a specific mood until the scare triggers it fully. Effective jump scares in games rely on psychological principles and careful design to maximize fear. They're most impactful when they follow a buildup of tension, not just sudden loud noises. The core idea is to lure the player into a false sense of security, making them focus on a specific task like solving a puzzle, managing resources, or navigating a dark corridor, so they are not anticipating the danger. When the scare occurs, it feels completely unexpected. One of my favorite examples of a jump scare is in Resident Evil 7 Biohazard. Right? I'm hearing noises. What is that sound? I don't like this. I don't like this at all. What is that? Ah! You'll hear the grotesque sounds and the ambient music. All you can see is the darkness of the stairwell. Then bam, jump scared. I can tell you when I first encountered this, my soul left my body for a full 5 seconds. Another way horror games scare you is by isolation and vulnerability. Removing social safety nets like allies or communication triggers primal fear. Players feel alone, powerless, and exposed, mirroring ancient survival threats. The absence of help amplifies tension, especially when resources are scarce or enemies are unkillable. Alien Isolation is a perfect example of this. I mean, it's in the name. Set on a space station, players take the role of Amanda Ripley, who must survive alone while being hunted by a single, intelligent xenomorph. The game masterfully amplifies the feeling of solitude through its oppressive atmosphere, limited resources, and the constant dread of an unseen predator. All you can do is survive. All horror media needs to have good atmosphere and sound design. I mean, what's a horror game that's full of bright lights and cheerful music? Sound design is a foundational element in horror games, directly manipulating player emotions and amplifying fear through psychological tactics. It relies on unsettling audio cues such as distant whispers, creaking floorboards, and sudden loud noises, which builds tension and signals danger. Silence is also used as a powerful tool. Its absence heightens awareness and makes players hypervigilant, priming them for jump scares. The atmosphere in video games is crafted through a combination of visual design, sound, and pacing. Dim lighting and shadows obscure the environment, fostering uncertainty and fear. Environmental storytelling, such as small, eerie details in the setting, convey backstory without words, deepening immersion. Dead Space in particular is a great example of this. The game's audio director, Don Baker, emphasized creating mood through overall sound design rather than traditional music themes. This approach treats the entire soundscape as a unified psychological tool. Amplified sounds such as the groans of a falling ship, distant screams, and creaking metal establish a pervasive sense of isolation and decay. My favorite technique horror games use to scare players is through psychological tension and unpredictability. The fear stems not from explicit threats, but from the uncanny valley effect, where familiar elements are subtly wrong, forcing players to interpret ambiguous clues. This uncertainty fuels anxiety as the mind fills with terrifying gaps, like what's behind the door, in the shadows, or in the silence. Unpredictability amplifies tension by subverting expectations. Developers use tension release cycles, building pressure slowly, delivering a scare, then offering brief relief, only to strike again when least expected. Silent Hill 2 masterfully uses psychological tension and unpredictability to create a deeply immersive and unsettling experience, transforming the player into an active participant in James Sunderland's deteriorating psyche. The game's persuasive thick fog limits visibility, creating a constant sense of vulnerability and anticipation. This visual restriction forces players to rely on sound, making the environment feel alive and threatening. The town itself acts as a mirror of James' subconscious, with shifting environments with decaying structures symbolizing his guilt, repression, and emotional turmoil. The game deliberately avoids jump scares in favor of controlled dread, where the tension builds slowly and is only briefly relieved. Even seemingly safe areas can become dangerous, and sympathetic characters may turn hostile, reinforcing the theme that nothing in Silent Hill is as what it seems. I talked about ways horror games are scary, but how are they entertaining? I think a key way is through immersion. Immersion is crucial in horror games because it transforms fear from a passive observation into a personal, visceral experience. When players are fully immersed, they stop seeing themselves as observers and instead feel like they are the protagonists. This sense of agency amplifies tension, making every decision, like choosing whether to hide in a closet or run, feel high stakes and emotionally charged. Immersion is often achieved using the same techniques that are used to scare the player.
No, it's crushing their car.
Something that all video games need to be entertaining is engaging gameplay mechanics. Without them, the game would simply be boring. But horror games don't have to be flashy, guns a-blazing, action-filled gameplay that most games have. Instead, they use core mechanics like limited resources, unpredictable enemy AI, hidden information, and environmental storytelling to maintain tension by creating uncertainty and a lack of control. While horror games aim to invoke fear, anxiety, and dread, engaging gameplay can unintentionally counteract these emotions by distracting the player's attention with rewarding systems like combat, puzzle solving, or resource management. A technique that is only used in specific horror video games is player choice. Games like Until Dawn and The Medium use branching narratives and player decisions that affect the story's outcome, increasing emotional stakes and replayability. The weight of the choices makes this experience feel personal and impactful. Knowing your choices have an impact on the characters in the game adds a whole new level of immersion. Horror games also use creative problem solving, integrating puzzles and challenges that provide a deliberate slowdown between intense horror moments, allowing the player's heart rate to drop. This contrast makes everything more impactful. The entertainment comes from overcoming obstacles through clever thinking rather than combat. Horror games also use dynamic and unpredictable threats, with games that introduce intelligent, adaptive enemies like the ever-changing environments and layers of fear, which keep players on edge, and the unpredictability of threats makes each encounter feel fresh and engaging. But in my opinion, the most important way horror games are effective is by having a good story. A good story is essential in horror games because it transforms fear from a fleeting reaction into a lasting emotional experience. Without a compelling narrative, even the most atmospheric environments or scariest jump scares can feel hollow and forgettable. The story provides meaning and stakes, giving players a reason to care about survival beyond simple morality. A well-crafted narrative deepens immersion by connecting a player to the protagonist's psychological struggles, fears, and personal journey. Narrative drives emotional investment, making scares more impactful. When players uncover lore through diary entries, audio logs, or environmental storytelling, they become active participants in unraveling the mystery. This process builds dread and anticipation, replacing cheap jump scares with sustained tension. My favorite game of all time is Signalis. It's not the scariest or most graphically intense. It doesn't even have the best gameplay, but what it does have is the most engaging and unforgettable stories I've ever had the chance to experience. The game unfolds as a dreamlike, cyclical journey where you play as Elster, who's searching for the human pilot of their ship. The game contains many subversions and complex subtexts. Signalis explores profound and interconnected themes centered on grief, identity, and the human condition within a decaying, oppressive world. Signalis remains powerful because the experience is not about solving a mystery, but feeling its emotional weight. Even after completing the game months and months ago, I still remember the feeling I felt while playing the game. A good story can elevate a game from great to absolutely life-changing. And that's how horror games are effective. I love horror games, and by the end of the video, I hope you, the viewer, can appreciate how horror games are beautifully crafted. Doing research for this video helped me learn about the psychology and development behind horror games. It simply just made me want to play even more of them. I know horror in general isn't for everyone, but I hope you now know why I think it's so amazing.
It's just a story I tell to you. Is it